Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit LegacyPMInvestments.com. That's LegacyPMInvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So breaking earlier today, the House did pass a very controversial $1.2 trillion spending bill that the majority of conservative Republicans actually voted against. These were the numbers. The nays of Republicans were 112 compared to the yays being 101. The Democrat totals were yay 185 and nay only 22. So this bill needed a 2/3 majority to pass. And it seems like even though the Republicans do have a very slim House majority, the Democrats were really in control here. So what was going on? Well, the Freedom Caucus chairman and leader, Representative Bob Good, had this to say.
Is there anything that some Republicans won't do to keep this government open? Why are we in a rush to keep this government open that is so harming the American people by the very policies which they are suffering under? But the bill, hey, one positive, I guess, it'll have thousands of earmarks for billions of dollars, earmarks which are used to buy or reward bad votes for bad votes for bad bills, like the bill that will pass today, it does seem.
He's so right. Why are we in such a rush to keep this government open? I would be fully happy with a shutdown and less resources to the Joe Biden administration, who is using some of those resources apparently to fly in over 350,000 illegals across the border, not protecting our borders, doing so many other things. Why are we in such a rush to avoid the government shutdown? Because this spending bill, along with the continuing resolutions that we've seen over the last couple of months, had to come by midnight tonight in order to avert a government shutdown. But it seems like Republicans just gave everything away. And so some Republicans are so upset, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative Greene from the state of Georgia, that she actually filed a motion to vacate the chair because she is so unhappy with Speaker Johnson's leadership. Remember, he's only been in the gavel position since last October, not really that long. So here is what Marjorie Taylor Greene had to say.
With rules and promises to the American people that we would bring regular order back to Congress. Speaker Johnson has betrayed that by passing 3 CRs and then forcing us to pass or to vote on a 2-part omnibus, the second one being today. He also only gave us, I don't even know how, we had one day basically to read 1,012 pages, breaking the 72-hour rule. This is a betrayal of the American people. This is a betrayal of Republican voters. And the bill that we were forced to vote on forced Republicans to choose between funding to pay our soldiers and in doing so, funding late-term abortion. This bill was basically a dream and a wish list for Democrats and for the White House. It was completely led by Chuck Schumer, not our Republican Speaker of the House, not our conference, and we weren't even allowed to put amendments to the floor to have a chance to make changes to the bill. I filed the motion to vacate today, but it's more of a warning and a pink slip. I respect our conference. I've paid all my dues to my conference. I'm a member in good standing, and I do not wish to inflict pain on our conference and to throw the House in chaos. But this is basically a warning, and it's time for us to go through the process, take our time, and find a new Speaker of the House that will stand with Republicans and our Republican majority instead of standing with the Democrats.
So is she right? Is it time to give Speaker Johnson the pink slip like the House did to Kevin McCarthy again last October? And so Speaker Johnson has actually only been in the seat since about mid-January, so only a couple of months. And remember, it took so long for the House to actually elect a new leader. Who could possibly replace him? Is she right that the GOP is just not getting it together under Speaker Mike Johnson? I know Speaker Mike Johnson, and I am personally floored that he would actually support support something that funds abortion as a pro-life homeschool father, that gives all of this spending away to things that are clearly not conservative priorities. So is this the correct motion now? And when a reporter asked Marjorie Taylor Greene, well, you're just saying that this is a warning, does this actually mean that you want Speaker Johnson gone? This is what she had to say in response.
So just to follow up on that, though, you're calling this a pink slip, a warning sign. The bottom line, you want Speaker Johnson out.
I wouldn't have filed a motion to vacate if I didn't. We need a new speaker. This is not personal against Mike Johnson. He's a very good man, and I have respect for him as a person, but he is not doing the job. The proof is in the vote count today. He passed a budget that should have never been brought to the floor, did not represent our conference, and it was passed with the Democrats and without the majority of the majority.
What happens?
I have very mixed feelings about this because on one hand, Marjorie Taylor Greene is absolutely right that this is not conservative priorities. And it does only take one vote for a member to file that motion that is required then under the current House rules to compel and force a vote on a motion to vacate the chair. And that only needs a simple majority. That's how Kevin McCarthy got ousted. But on the other hand, who is going to step up as a GOP leader? We only have a Republican majority by 2 seats. I mean, this is something that we've seen once Kevin McCarthy was ousted and then Speaker Johnson finally came in. I mean, this went through several House votes. Of course, Jim Jordan was one who wanted the gavel, didn't get the votes, and it took months of delays. And so was this really the best maneuver here? But at the same time, isn't she right that Speaker Johnson doesn't seem to be actually advocating for conservative priorities when the majority of Republicans are voting against this, and it was only 101 Republicans to 185 of the Democrats voting yes for this. I mean, that just seems like this is a Democrat bill. Why is it always that Republicans can't get it together as a conference to actually compel the Democrats to vote for conservative priorities? What is so wrong with the shutdown? And maybe we need a shutdown for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. It's not going to, completely destroy national security priorities. We've learned through other shutdowns that government employees that are deemed unnecessary will still stay in operation. So why are Republicans so hesitant to avoid a government shutdown when this is the price? So I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is sending this warning to Speaker Johnson. What the GOP decides to do about it, I mean, it's only going to take a couple of votes if all of the Democrats say yes to this motion, that we are back where we are in last October without a speaker, without conservative priorities, and really without a direction. Does the GOP really want this heading into November? This is going to be the conversation over the weekend, but we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight on a very, very busy News Friday. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So following Super Tuesday, of course, the nation's attention in a presidential year is generally on the presidential election and that rematch between Trump versus Biden. But some states are actually causing a sovereign rebellion of their own, including the state of Texas. And this headline coming from The Hill and an opinion contributor: political earthquake in Texas, Austin's oligarchy cracked on Tuesday. Joining me now is Matt Rinaldi, who is the Texas GOP chairman. And Matt, this is exactly, I think, what red states need to do and what conservatives across the nation, even in blue states, need to do, which is to get out and vote and to vote out not only Democrats, but these Republicans in name only. So what happened in Texas during the primaries, which was also on Super Tuesday, that is causing what this opinion contributor, I think, rightly describes as an earthquake?
It was an earthquake, and what happened was about 11 seats shifted to the right in the Texas House. Another 8 seats went to runoffs with a very good chance of winning those seats. And we had a number of retirements of House members that didn't even want to go into the election. So we're going to see about 1/3 of the Republican House members being new members next session. And that was because voters were upset about the Paxton impeachment. They were upset about the House killing school choice. And they were upset about something we've been drawing attention to for a couple of years now. The Texas State House is the only legislative chamber in the United States where the Republicans take power and then voluntarily give away committee chairmanships and positions of power to Democrats. They share leadership with Democrats, and they have a joint agenda with Democrats, and that needs to stop.
Yeah, I didn't know all of that information until there were so many media reports, and people like you were coming on my radio show here on Salem as well to talk about the actual situation in Texas and giving the Democrats those chairmanships, which I think is fundamentally ridiculous for Republicans to cede that kind of ground. So what do you think has been the most effective in terms of getting out the message and actually spurring on voters to action, not just to be upset about it, but to actually go and make a difference at the polls?
Well, from the party's perspective, as chairman of the state party, we did something that very few, if any, other state parties have done. We started spending significant amounts of money before campaign season and during the legislative session to inform voters on the progress of our Republican Party of Texas legislative priorities that they chose at the state convention. We had spent around over $300,000 informing voters, hey, there's Democrat chairs in the state house. Your Republican reps are giving up power. Your Republican reps are impeaching Ken Paxton in an unfounded sham impeachment. We told them about bills that were being killed at the hands of this Democrat-Republican coalition. And that helped. And then when we got into campaign season, voters already had that base of knowledge. And then they were ready to hear the campaign messages, and it comported with what they'd heard before.
And that's so incredibly important because often you hear conservative pundits just talk about the apathetic voter and to say, well, education isn't enough. We need to spur on to action. And people know this kind of thing. But clearly, as Texas has now evidenced, informing the voters actually does spur them on to action. And so how would you encourage other either chairmen of the GOP in other states, even in blue states, for example, to educate and inform their voters and have a similar outcome as in Texas?
I think, first of all, we need a reshaping of the way that state parties think of their role. Their role isn't only to raise money, win elections during campaign season. Their role is to be the voice of the grassroots Republicans in their area. Their voice is to affect positive policy change in the long run. And elections is one way to do that, but they also have to keep an informed voter base. They don't serve the elected officials first. They serve their Republican voters first, and they need to keep that in mind. I think once that mentality changes, I think a lot of it follows. And I think the parties can start doing things to affect this positive change in primary elections, because people tune out once they start hearing the election messages coming from all angles. We need to keep them informed even when there's not a campaign ongoing.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense because a lot of voters are very concerned about the issues, not just hearing from, the standard messaging that they know is going to be from party to party, Republican versus Democrat. And so do you see this also happening on a national level with now the handover and the change off in leadership from the RNC? Are you encouraged to see that maybe that Michael Whatley and Laura Trump, who are now co-chairing, will spend more time or resources and give them to state parties for your in-state elections that really matter as well?
I don't know what that remains to be seen, I would say. I can say that here in Texas, the RNC has given us tremendous support. They've directed resources for a dedicated election integrity officer, and I've been happy with the support they've been providing us. I am very optimistic about Chairman Whatley's leadership and Laura Trump's leadership, and hope to see some positive changes in the RNC. There's a lot changing right now in the RNC, so it's kind of hard to see once the smoke clears what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. It is kind of a wait and see. And so, in just the last about minute and a half I have with you, Matt Rinaldi, what is upcoming for Texas in the runoffs, and what's the time frame there, and where can people go to find more of this information if they live in the state of Texas and they're very interested, but they haven't yet heard the kind of education piece that you've been describing?
Well, you can go to texasgop.org. We provide information at our website. They can sign up for our email blast so they can get info from the state party. The runoff is on March 28th. It's going to be very important because in those 8 elections, we need to make the same showing that we made on March 5th in order to see things change. There is a real sea change happening right now as elected officials realize they can't share power with Democrats. They can't empower Democrats and keep their job. And if we want anything to change in Austin, we have to keep up the pressure.
Yeah, well, I hope there is yet another earthquake in Texas on March 28th. So, Matt Rinaldi, really appreciate your time and all of the resources that the Texas GOP has provided to voters to make sure that we have an informed voter base and that we get out and support conservative policy. So, we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, if you weren't yet convinced that the Biden administration is attempting to coerce the American taxpayer to fund the woke DEI agenda using federal dollars, this report has come exclusively from the Daily Wire through their reporter Spencer Lindquist on X yesterday. He says this: I obtained the State Department's official report on DEI spending to Congress. Representative McCall warned that the civil service, quote, must pledge allegiance to DEI or risk not being promoted. But the State Department's narrow definition of DEI means that the sum could be even higher. He goes on to say the $77 million spent over 2 years under Biden accounts for the Bureau of Talent Management's DEI spending. The agency requested another $83 million for 2024. There's also the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, led by Constance Mayer, who pulls in almost $180,000 a year. So Congressman Bob Good from Virginia was also posting on Twitter a thread that talks about Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget plans. And he says this: President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget plans continue bleeding taxpayers dry to pander to the Democrat Party's radical base. A few of the most egregious aspects include, and this was one of them a couple of tweets down, he said provides $3 billion to advance so-called gender equity and equality worldwide. So this isn't just in America, including $200 million for the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund. It further harms American energy by shutting down offshore oil and gas wells. So Walker Wildmon is the vice president for the American Family Association, where I host Jenna Ellis in the morning from 8 to 9 Eastern on American Family Radio Network. And Walker, this just seems so blatantly irresponsible of the Biden administration to coerce American taxpayers, that include conservatives, to fund their woke agenda. And as Representative Good said on my show this morning, Republicans in Congress are just not standing up. Why not?
Yeah, the essence of Dr. Martin Luther King's revolution and movement was that we were supposed to be colorblind, right? But here we are, and the Biden administration, in every way possible, is measuring everything from not only the color of your skin, your ethnicity, but they're also looking at whether you're gender neutral, whether you're queer, whether you're lesbian, gay. The list goes on of all the acronyms that they use. But yeah, this is just another example, another iteration of the complete waste of money that Washington, D.C. exercises on a daily basis. And this is the most egregious. I mean, how much more egregious do you need to get when it comes to taxpayers' dollars being wasted here in Washington, D.C. With the Biden administration? And in many cases, this stuff is illegal in many cases. And I know America First Legal and Stephen Miller and some others are suing on some of these grounds. But discriminating based on your skin color, your ethnicity, or your sex is illegal. You're not supposed to be doing that. But that's exactly what DEI preaches.
Yeah, and obviously conservatives and of course Christians are fundamentally against this worldview that is implicit in the policy of DEI that is now being advanced and embedded in a lot of our institutions. But for taxpayers to have to support this, and it's Congress that controls the purse strings, and Republicans, even though it's a very slim majority right now, still control the House. So, from an AFA action perspective, and in terms of actually asking the American people and conservatives who care about this to contact their members of Congress to say, why are we spending billions of dollars worldwide on something that we clearly don't even have the money for? But even if we had the money, why are we spending it on this?
Yeah, the types of overseas programs that we fund are infuriating. I mean, we've been forcing DEI on other nations that are impoverished. I mean, these are people that don't even have food to eat, and we're worried about DEI. And look at Africa. We've been pushing a sexual deviancy on Africa for a decade or more now. I mean, even the Obama administration was obsessed with pushing homosexuality on African nations. So we've totally got our priorities out of order. We got a porous southern border. We've got fentanyl killing over 100,000 Americans every year. But we've got to keep up with the number of LGBTQ people that we hire and their ethnicity when we hire them. This is just a complete waste of time. And yes, we need to urge our congressmen and our senators not to fund this Biden garbage agenda.
Yeah, and we've seen with some of these spending bills how Congress has had these mini buses instead of the omnibus, and they've continued to try to avoid a government shutdown by basically giving Democrats and leftists a lot of their priorities on spending. How damaging is that really overall to conservatives when we look at things like DEI and how the American taxpayer is funding some of these absolutely ridiculous priorities over and above truly America first policies, and not in the political sense, but genuinely just Americans first?
Yeah, the Biden administration, I will say they've only done one good job at something, and that is funneling government money into their left-wing nonprofits. And I know some people are raising the alarm about these nonprofits that are engaging in quote unquote, election turnout, but they're really turning out Democrats is what they're doing. So right now, the Biden administration, they're funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into left-wing nonprofits to get Biden reelected. So that's a major, major concern. And look, the only thing we have between Biden and his agenda right now is Republicans in the House of Representatives. So we've got to fight back and use the power of the purse more and more. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and her crew did it with Trump. They hamstrung him on the wall and other issues. So we've got to leverage the power of the purse more and more as the days go on.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of conservatives, they're very focused right now in a presidential year on the presidential election. But this issue exemplifies exactly why we need to pay attention to down ticket races as well. And AFA Action puts out a voter guide for all federal offices. Talk about that resource for conservatives who may not know the differences in some of the voting record or the policy stances, even in primaries, but certainly when it comes to general elections, some of the differences between the candidates from a policy perspective, not just party.
Yeah, one of the things we look at our iVoter Guide project, which is iVoterGuide.com, is we look at not only who endorses these candidates, who gives money to the campaigns, but what is their voting record? And so if these Republicans, Democrats, congressmen, senators, if they voted for these bloated omnibus bills that give billions to Ukraine and billions to foreign initiatives and hundreds of millions to these George Soros related nonprofits, then we're tracking that. And we actually have those voting records for these politicians running for re-election. So iVoterGuide.com is the URL. It's an excellent resource in this primary season and as we head into November.
Well, Walker Wildmon, thanks so much for your work and for the American Family Association. This is why we came up with the term Republican in name only, because sometimes you just can't tell only based on party. You always have to go and do your research and look and see what is the voting record and the policy stances of these candidates. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. So, speaking about everything woke and all of the nonsense that is going on in social media, in our institutions, and basically in our culture in general, I personally cannot stand virtue signaling. This is something where somebody just does an overt act or says a thing or a phrase or something just so that they can describe just how woke and fantastic they are. The most recent example I think in our memory is the left that virtue signaled by wearing those ridiculous COVID masks across their faces. Do you remember chin masking? Like when the mask was only like right here and your nose and mouth, it didn't even matter. And so that was definitely virtue signaling. But my guest Auron MacIntyre wrote this headline in The Blaze that says the right was wrong about virtue signaling. So Auron, thanks so much for joining, and tell me why I'm wrong about virtue signaling.
Sure, we all understand that there are these incredibly annoying behaviors like you're talking about that we consider wildly off-putting, and we called them virtue signals, right? It's the left going out of their way to show their tribal affiliation. I am one of the good ones. I agree with certain things. I'm on board with certain practices, and I want to give an outward showing of my loyalty to my team by doing this performative action so everyone can observe how holy I am. That can be very frustrating for people, understandably so, especially when it's something that's deleterious to the rest of society. But what we need to understand, I think, is that virtue signaling is actually just part of human nature. Everyone is looking to go ahead and show that they are someone who's worthy of a certain status, that they belong with a certain set of people, the good people, the wise people. They want to be seen as someone who is contributing to society and siding with what is approved by kind of the ruling elites in our nation. And so they go out of their way to do that. We're never going to avoid that type of behavior. It's innate to the way that humans are. So the problem isn't so much that virtue signaling exists. It's always going to exist. The question is, what kind of virtues are being signaled? Are real virtues being signaled? Are Christian virtues being signaled? Or are the virtues of the woke left being signaled?
That's a really interesting perspective. And as you were talking about, how the left of virtue signals, I was thinking, well, a lot of, frankly, Christians do that with, wearing of the cross necklaces or, having, my favorite thing is the Instagram setup where it's like, this is typically women. And I can say that because I'm a woman, but, they have like their Bible open to a specific verse that's like underlined and highlighted with their coffee and their notepad and everything. I mean, that's virtue signaling, right? But what you're suggesting is that some virtue signaling is okay. It just depends on which virtues we're signaling.
Well, as we know, as Christians, we're supposed to do virtuous acts, whether we receive credit for them or not. The Bible specifically tells us that if we're going to pray in the closet. If you're going to give alms, it should not be a loud thing that you raise attention to. That is the best way to do things. But we also have to be realistic and understand that in every given society, there are people who are going to want to, again, signal their status, signal their virtue. That's a bad part of human nature, but we should also understand that it's a constant part of human nature. And better that we have Christian norms or true virtue that gets signaled rather than these things that, again, are very deleterious to our way of life. Recently, there was a video of a woman with 4 children who had all been trans. And a lot of people were correctly and rightly pointing out that this woman was hurting her children just to signal her virtue, that this is not the chances of having 4 children with severe gender dysmorphia are incredibly small and very clearly. Instead, this was the influence of the parent. And they were absolutely right. But they said, oh, this is a medical disease. It's Munchausen by proxy. But the answer is no, it's not. It's actually a very common human impulse to find a behavior in high society, in elite society, that you think confers status, and then go ahead and loudly mimic that behavior and show it to other people. Again, it's not good. It's not something that we would like to see the average person do, but it is something that people will do. And so if they are going to do it, better that they do it with, say, giving something to the poor rather than transing their children.
Well, point taken. So, virtue signaling is just an aspect of society that unfortunately has been so amplified and is so readily accessible by Instagram and by, some of these other social media apps where it's just another way of kind of keeping up with the Joneses, as, the old saying goes, where everybody is kind of virtue signaling in their own way. But at the same time, if you're going to virtue signal, it should be something that is genuinely virtuous. And so we need to talk as a society and culture about what virtues are we signaling? And I totally agree with you on that point. I mean, I can't stand the virtue signaling from masks to, the woman who has, her Bible out and, all this stuff that you're going, did you actually read anything, or did you take the 30 minutes to put up your full Instagram shot? Now, I've posted on Instagram, pictures of like, reading at the beach or whatever, but it's mainly the focus should be at least on the virtues. It should be about increasing your faith, not just getting likes on social media. And if you're going to post any of those pictures, that's a whole other conversation, but hopefully you're doing that in a way that's just like me. I mean, it's just a photo album. It's for fun. But a lot of the political things are the things that I hope to influence. So how can we, with the understanding of how social media works in society and virtue signaling is a constant, how can we try to influence what virtues we're signaling?
Yeah, well, you're very right to bring social media into this problem, this equation, because obviously social media is an incredibly performative environment. You have this hyper reality where people are curating their day. They're not showing you the times where they have a bad haircut or they get dirty doing some kind of work or they embarrass themselves. They're only putting the best things they think are available out there so people can observe them and think that they're better than others. And so the entire practices of this on social media is itself a problem. I don't know if social media can really be fixed, or if it is actually at the end of the day something that just destroys the human character slowly over time. That's something that as a society we're going to probably have to figure out. It's a hard lesson. I think there's a reason that most people involved in social media, the real tech gurus, they're actually trying to keep their kids off of these devices and off of social media as much as possible, because they know at the end of the day that Skinner box they've created, that thing that is designed to get likes and attention economy constantly, is not great for the people who are participating in it. But if there's going to be something, again, like you said, that is virtue signal, at least if the Bible is out there somewhere, someone might say, hey, I wonder what's in there. Maybe I should take some time to actually investigate those words, as opposed to someone glorifying, again, the transitioning of children or some other terrible thing.
And that's a totally valid perspective, of course, Auron, to say, well, I'd rather have at least the content of scripture and something wholesome than, of course, the trans. And we can totally agree on that. But definitely read The Peace and the Blaze. And maybe this gave you something to think about before you post next on social media. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. And finally tonight, if you are a conservative that is looking to combat the left's climate hysteria with truth, there is a great new book that Salem would highly recommend, and this is called Climate and Energy, The Case For Realism. So this is co-edited by Dr. Cal Beisner, who is the founder and president of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. So Dr. Cal, thank you so much for joining me. And this is a very timely topic, and of course, reality and realism is always timely, the truth of creation, rather than how the left like to reinvent reality. And of course, they can't. So what can readers expect from this case for realism?
Well, I think what they can expect, first of all, is good, solid, hard science. Practically the entire case for the notion of, really dangerous, perhaps catastrophic, existential threat, climate change, it comes from computer climate models. That's how we design a computer program to see what we think the climate might do if this or that happened. But models are not reality. And sadly, the computer models that the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and various other organizations, including the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which issues our national climate assessment, the models on which they rely, on average, simulate warming that is 2 to 3 times as much as actually observed in the relevant data for the relevant periods of time. That means the models, frankly, provide no rational basis for any predictions about future temperature, and therefore no rational basis for any kind of policy having to do with global warming. Instead, we need to go to hard, real-world, empirical observational evidence. That's the key to science, as the late Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman put it. You have to test your hypothesis by making predictions of what you ought to see if it's true. And then you look at the real world and you see if those predictions came true. And if they don't, then your guess, your hypothesis is wrong. And it doesn't matter how beautiful it is or how smart you are, frankly, how many people agree with you. So the appeal to models and the appeal to consensus are both really, frankly, anti-scientific. The hard evidence shows us that warming from our emissions of carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide and so on, it's real. We are making the world a little warmer than it otherwise would be, but it's certainly not dangerous. The benefits probably outweigh the harms, and certainly the benefits from the energy, the abundant, affordable, reliable energy that we get from coal, oil, and natural gas, and the benefits of enhanced plant growth and therefore crop yields and therefore food production from added carbon dioxide in the atmosphere far outweigh any harms that can be predicted on the basis of climate change.
So beautifully expressed. And I wish that our society generally and in specific disciplines, like science especially, would go where the evidence leads instead of wanting a preferred outcome and looking to manipulate the data or the models or the evidence to fit that ultimate conclusion. That's not the way that we should do science. It's not the way we should do law. It's not the way we should do a lot of disciplines. But on the flip side of this, a lot of conservatives are probably thinking, well, climate change is completely a hoax and we don't care about any of this. And I've even seen people on social media suggesting that, well, nothing's going to happen in my lifetime. So why do I even care about green energy? And yet the truth is we should care about our planet. We should always be good stewards
Absolutely.
of God's creation. And so what should conservatives genuinely care about when it comes to accurate data when we're talking about the so-called climate change or the left's, kind of ridiculousness? How can we combat that with truth?
Well, what we need to do really is to get down to hard empirical data. That's what we do in this book. We have 9 different climate scientists, all of them very well published in peer-reviewed literature, who have contributed to this. We have several different economists, including one economist who's also a climate scientist. And we have also energy experts and energy engineers. And so what we've put together is a case that, no, global warming is not a hoax, frankly. And it's really sad when some conservatives say so. There are some bits and pieces of the case for it that maybe you could call a hoax, but not the overall claim that human emissions of greenhouse gases are contributing to a bit of global warming. That's not a hoax. What is totally to be rejected is the notion that it's going to be, as President Biden has said repeatedly, an existential threat to humanity or to the planet. Not even the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says anything remotely like that. It's massive periodic assessment reports of the science of climate change very clearly stay way short of any such claim. The only place you get that kind of thing is from press releases from the United Nations and from politicians and, unfortunately, the mainstream media following the lead of radical environmentalist organizations. So we want to encourage people to think very carefully about this, to have a view that we might call objective moderation. Just follow the facts.
And that's so well put, because conservatives do need to look at the facts, and we shouldn't come in with our own biases, like saying, well, because the left has made this an existential crisis and we know that's false, we're just going to reject the entire issue of
Right.
climate change, and we're not even going to be knowledgeable about this. And this is what I love about your book, and why I'm really excited to read it, is because conservatives should always know at least enough to be conversant on almost any subject. And this is no different. And so in just the last about minute and a half that I have with you, Dr. Cal, how should policy be shaped given correct data, correct evidence, and correct models?
Well, that would take a lot more than a minute and a half to go into any kind of details, but I can say this. I think our first and most important concern has to be what will be the impact of policy on America's poor and especially on the world's poor, because frankly, America's poor are rich beyond the dreams of avarice compared with the poor in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia and Latin America. What will the policies do to them? Well, there are roughly 3 billion people in the world who have zero access to electricity. So no refrigeration, no lights, no air conditioning, no clothes washers or dryers, anything like that, the stuff that we all take for granted. Those people desperately need access to electricity.
Well, Dr. Cal Beisner, thanks so much. That's all the time that we have here on Jenna Ellis tonight, but you can get that book and be conversant in all of these issues that conservatives genuinely should care about, but we should always care about truth.